Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2E and House Rule 11-2H4, the committee announces that he may postpone roll call votes. Today, we meet to consider H.R. 6227, the National Quantum Initiative Act, H.R. 6229, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Reauthorization Act of 2018, and H.R. 6226, the American Space Safe Management Act. I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. The first bill we consider, H.R. 6227, the National Quantum Initiative Act, supports a much more concentrated, coordinated federal effort to accelerate quantum research and technology development for the economic and national security of the United States. Let me thank Ranking Member Eddie Bernice Johnson and the 28 other members of the committee for co-sponsoring this bipartisan legislation. The second bill is H.R. 6229, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Reauthorization Act of 2018. This legislation, sponsored by Research and Technology Subcommittee Chairwoman Barbara Comstock, authorizes NIST research and technology programs for 2 years. The bill provides for increased fundamental scientific and technical research and investments in emerging technology areas. This will ensure continued U.S. innovation leadership in quantum science, artificial intelligence, and big data science, cybersecurity, the Internet of Things, and sustainable infrastructure. Chairwoman Comstock's bill also directs NIST to use its cybersecurity expertise to assist federal agencies in improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. The final bill is H.R. 6226, the American Space Safe Management Act. This landmark legislation, co-sponsored by Space Subcommittee Chairman Brian Babin, Ranking Member Ami Bera, and Congressman Ed Perlmutter, establishes a space traffic management framework that will ensure a safe operating environment in outer space. I'll recognize the Ranking Member, the gentlewoman from Texas, Eddie Johnson, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, for holding today's markup of 3 bills. The first bill we are considering is the National Quantum Initiative Act. This is a good bill, and I'm happy to urge my colleagues to join me in co-sponsoring the legislation. I'll speak more on this bill in a little while. So let me just say that I'm very happy the Science Committee has taken the lead here in this cutting-edge field. I also want to thank the chair for working closely with us to craft a bipartisan bill that I think will also be widely supported by industry and academia. This bill really is a good example of what the Science Committee does best, and I look forward to its passage. The second bill we are considering, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Reauthorization Act of 2018, is another good bill which I'm co-sponsoring. This bill reauthorizes one of our most important but underappreciated agencies in the federal government. NIST is a vital partner for American industry in fields as diverse as infrastructure construction to cybersecurity. They are also an essential collaborator with the American manufacturing. I want to thank the chairman for working with us to address some concerns we had with the original draft of the bill, and I support the manager's amendment that is intended to address several of those concerns. I look forward to advancing this bill through the House and working with the Senate to get it enacted. Finally, we are marking up the American Space Safe Management Act. Unfortunately, I must reluctantly oppose this bill today. I want to be clear. I strongly support efforts to establish a civilian space situational awareness capacity. However, I do not support our committee rubber stamping the half-baked efforts of the Trump administration to address the issue. Currently, the Department of Defense handles space situational awareness for the U.S. government. There's been a growing recognition that the civilian side of this work would be more appropriate outside DOD. The Obama administration began to plan for this, and work was underway to place this function at the Department of Transportation, which currently is the body that promotes and regulates commercial space launch and reentry. Then the Trump administration came in and decided it wanted to move this function to the Department of Commerce instead. This is in spite of the fact that Commerce has no existing infrastructure or expertise to support this important work. In fact, no credible reason has been articulated for why the Commerce Department is the best place to house the function. The only discernible motivation for reversing course is that they didn't want to endorse something Obama had started. This is no way to govern, and it wouldn't be the first time this administration has acted that way. I'll have an amendment later to do this oversight. Congress should have demanded. I've been in hearings in other committees on this very same subject. Let's have the academies look at the issue and give us guidance on what civilian agency is best suited to shoulder this new responsibility. Maybe they decide Commerce is the right one, or maybe they will decide that our $21 billion civilian space agency would be best. Then we can come back and make an informed decision instead of just rubber stamping the ill-formed ideas coming from the Trump administration. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 6227, the National Quantum Initiative Act, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6227, a bill to provide for a coordinated federal program to accelerate quantum research and development for the economic and national security of the United States.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and I'll recognize myself to speak on the bill. 60 years ago, the first commercial computer was almost the size of this room. Today, we hold more computing power in our hand with an iPhone. Just as classical computing redefined the 20th century, quantum is poised to redefine the next generation of scientific breakthroughs. Conventional computing uses a series of tiny electronic on-off switches within a processing chip. Technological advances have made possible supercomputers that can perform series of on-off operations at astonishing speeds. But classical computing technology is nearing its limits. Quantum computing is different. Quantum computers rely on qubits. These are subatomic particles that are both on and off at the same time. This will enable quantum computers to perform complex calculations at speeds that are potentially millions of times faster than today's most advanced supercomputers. Quantum will create exciting new opportunities in areas like cybersecurity, medicine, communications, financial services, and transportation. But the potential threat to America's security is sobering. The nation that develops quantum communications technology first may be able to decode in a matter of seconds other countries' sensitive national security information, proprietary technologies, and personal information. Last October, the Science Committee held a hearing on American leadership in quantum technology. Experts testified that as other nations around the world are rapidly advancing quantum programs, the United States faces the threat of falling behind. China and the European Union are investing billions of dollars in new research facilities and equipment for quantum computing. China, in particular, has stated publicly its national goal of surpassing the U.S. during the next decade. Now is the time to compose a national quantum strategy and preserve America's dominance in the scientific world. The National Quantum Initiative Act will meet these challenges by forming a 10-year program to advance quantum science development and technology applications in the United States. The bill leverages the expertise and resources of U.S. industry, academia, and government to move quantum information science to the next level of research and development. The legislation establishes a National Quantum Coordination Office within the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. The office will oversee interagency coordination and strategic planning, serve as a central point of contact for stakeholders, conduct outreach, and promote commercialization of federal research by the private sector. The bill also supports basic research, education, and standards development at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Energy. $225 million a year of these agencies' baseline funding will now be directed to new quantum research centers and laboratory research. Their activities will address fundamental research gaps, create a stronger workforce, and develop revolutionary knowledge, and transformative innovations to give U.S. companies and workers an enduring competitive advantage. The bill ensures that U.S. high-tech companies, which are investing heavily in quantum research and a surge of quantum technology startups, will contribute their knowledge and resources to the national effort. H.R. 6227 was developed with input from industry, academia, national laboratories, federal agencies, and the administration. It was an open and bipartisan process. The input of those stakeholders has yielded a good consensus bill. We have received broad support, including letters from the National Photonics Initiative, the Quantum Industry Coalition, which I think consists of about 15 members, IBM, Intel, Google, Harris Corporation, Yale, Harvard, the University of Maryland, and the Optical Society, among many others. I thank Ranking Member Johnson for joining me in introducing this bill and the many members of the committee who have signed on as original co-sponsors. I would also like to acknowledge that Senator Thune and Senator Nelson, the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, have introduced a companion bill in the Senate. With bipartisan, bicameral support and the backing of the administration, I believe this bill could become law by the end of the year. Winning this scientific race requires a new moonshot for the 21st century. This bill will align ongoing federal, academic, and private sector research for a quantum leap in the right direction. That concludes my statement, and now the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for hers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the fact that you've introduced H.R. 6227, the National Quantum Initiative Act, on which I'm happy to be a co-sponsor. This legislation will establish a national program to accelerate progress in research and technology development related to quantum information science. Research in this area promises to revolutionize the way we solve problems by leveraging quantum effects such as superposition and entanglement. Many believe quantum computing technology has the potential to accelerate progress on some of our most pressing challenges, including how to address climate change and understand complex diseases like cancer. The race is on to build the world's first quantum computer capable of solving problems that have long eluded conventional computers. Not unlike the space race in the 60s, the stakes in today's quantum race are high. Global leadership in quantum computing brings with it a military and intelligence edge, as well as a competitive advantage in what many expect to be a massive industry for decades to come. The National Quantum Initiative authorized in this bill enables coordinated activities at the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as well as many other important federal agencies that will have a role in developing and benefiting from these technologies. Along with sustaining support for research in this area in general, DOE and NSF will fund new national centers to bring together preeminent experts in quantum science, hardware and software development. And education and NIST will lead the way in developing the measurement and standards infrastructure vital to the emerging industry. By promoting access to the products of these activities across the federal government and to academia and the private sector, the National Quantum Initiative ensures that we will maximize the return on this investment. We must invest more in this research. We need to ensure that we're educating and training the next generation of top quantum scientists and engineers. And we should do more to encourage partnerships between government, academia, and industry. This is good legislation, and this will put us on the right track, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this passage.
And you yield back. The gentleman yields back, and her statement is appreciated. We will now go to amendments on this particular bill, and the first one is going to be offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holkman, and he is recognized for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
And the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6227, offered by Mr. Holtgren of Illinois, amendment number 002.
Okay, without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment adds a provision to the duties of the National Quantum Coordination Office, tasking it with ensuring that the federal research agencies, through their quantum research programs and the new NSF and DOE centers, are utilizing existing quantum computers and communication systems for federally funded research. Several U.S. companies, universities, and laboratories have developed or are developing functioning quantum systems. It's important that the government not duplicate those efforts already underway, but tap those resources to further basic research and application development. DOE, NSF, and NIST have all supported research grants in the past utilizing private supercomputer and cloud computing systems, and this will ensure that they continue to do the same thing for quantum systems. Again, I want to thank Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Johnson for working with me and the external stakeholders on this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Holgren. I support the amendment and recommend our colleagues support it as well. Is there any further discussion?
We strike the last word.
Who seeks recognition? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Lipinski is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the amendment, and I thank the chairman for working in a bipartisan way on this bill. I think it's very important that what we do, what we aim to accomplish in this bill, invest significant federal resources in a promising technology whose benefits may be a long way off, but where there's fierce international competition. It's going to be through strategic decisions like these that we will become the world's economic, scientific, and technical leader in this as we start out now, and we can only maintain that position through continuing significant investment in cutting-edge basic research. We know other countries are increasing their investments in quantum technology, in some cases guided by long-term strategies, and this bill will make sure that we develop a coherent strategy of our own. Mr. Holtgren and I were both come from the Chicago area, and I think it's important to highlight and commend the research partnership from Chicago that's been instrumental in contributing to the committee's understanding of quantum information science, including testifying at hearings, participating in roundtables, and reviewing drafts of this legislation. Chicago Quantum Exchange is a partnership between University of Chicago, Argonne National Lab, and Fermi National Accelerator Lab. Chairman Weber had a Codell out to these labs a few weeks ago, and a number of members of the committee got to hear more about what they're doing when it comes to quantum. The exchange was created to develop and grow interdisciplinary collaborations for the exploration and development of new quantum-enabled technologies and help educate a new generation of quantum information scientists and engineers. Partnership with the private sector is also an important element of the exchange. Chicago Quantum Exchange may be a model for the future of R&D in quantum information science, and this bill will help that and help our country when it comes to moving ahead with quantum. With that, yield my colleagues to support the amendment in the bill, and I'll yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Is there any further discussion? If not, the question is on the Holtgren amendment. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment is going to be offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, and he's recognized for that purpose.
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr.
And the clerk will
Chairman.
report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6227, offered by Mr. Rohrabacher of California, amendment number 057.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ronald Reagan, who I once worked for, once said, "No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size, so government's programs once launched never disappear. Actually, they're the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth," end of quote. My amendment would end the National Nanotechnology Initiative by transitioning the duties and activities to the appropriate federal agencies and offices as we stand up the National Quantum Initiative. Since the passage of the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act of 2003, which I supported, the Nanotechnology Initiative, which is the NDI, has helped make the United States a global leader in nanotechnology. From fiscal year 2001 through fiscal year 2015, the federal government has spent approximately $20 billion, close to $21 billion actually, in this in nanoscale research, engineering technology through the NNI. After years of nanotechnology research, federal agencies have well established this research, nanotechnology research, and regulatory activities. Nanotechnology is not some new amorphous thing that we are trying to get a handle on and build a strategy around. We have been successful at that, and while I am certain some level of cross-collaboration will continue to be useful in this area, there is no longer any necessity for this overreaching program. The NNI is 15 years old this year. The Manhattan Project lasted 5 years. The Human Genome Project, which I supported, lasted 13 years. There is clearly more research to be done in nanotechnology, and this proposal doesn't stop federal agencies from pursuing nanotechnology in their specific areas. But this type of overarching coordination and spending has reached its logical endpoint. The NNI has been a great catalyst to bring our nation to the next level, but continuing it requires the use of limited resources, which threatens new initiatives like the National Quantum Initiative, which is critical for America's future. We should not continue to subsidize our focus. It is important to sunset these things, and they should not just go on in perpetuity. I would note the Quantum Initiative and the base bill sunsets, what we are about to pass, sunsets after 10 years. And I know some will oppose what I'm suggesting here as a reflexive refusal to end any government program, to close any government office, no matter how clearly it has outlived its usefulness. But I would note that the NNI was never intended to be a never-ending entitlement. And again, I voted for that initiative when we started it, but it wasn't meant to be a never-ending program. The program has succeeded in helping push the U.S. to the next frontier of nanotechnology. It did its job, and now it's time to move on to the next phase, which is the Quantum Initiative. And the Quantum Initiative is a proper way for Congress to coordinate and support pioneering scientific research over the next decade by establishing a 10-year framework, which is what our bill does, for moving quantum past this point and into the next stage of development, which is to maintain scientific leadership in for the United States. All things being said, I have no interest in derailing this agreement that our chairman and others have worked so hard to put in place. So I expect to withdraw this amendment once everyone has had an opportunity to discuss it, and I thought I would add these thoughts so people can basically understand the dynamics of why we have a $20 trillion bill that we're passing on to future generations. We need to be able to end programs as well as begin them. We cannot create endless programs and initiatives that with no end dates included. John Kennedy set the goal of landing a man on the moon before the decade was out. Deadlines focus minds and efforts. Endpoints for our programs can be just as important as starting points. And so I will be withdrawing my amendment if there's no other discussion. But I thank the leadership for the initiative that you're showing today. And let us be responsible when we create new initiatives that are important for our country. I yield back.
Mr. Rohrabacher, thank you for your good points. As you suggested, we'll see if there's any further discussion, but I appreciate your willingness to withdraw the amendment and let us advance the legislation. But is there any further discussion on this particular amendment? If not, without objection, the amendment will be...
I withdraw my amendment.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. The last amendment is by the gentleman from Illinois. Mr. Foster, and he is recognized to offer the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Smith. I'd like to also thank my colleague, Congresswoman Esty, for...
Okay, and the clerk will report the amendment first. And
Amendment to H.R. 6227, offered by Mr. Foster of Illinois, amendment number 110.
And without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I'd like to thank my colleague, Congresswoman Esty, for co-sponsoring this amendment, which I intend to withdraw at the conclusion of the debate. This was a few months ago, we held a joint subcommittee hearing on American leadership in quantum technology. This was a very productive and bipartisan discussion, and I'm glad that the committee followed up with outreach to many stakeholders in this important issue. I join my Republican and Democratic colleagues in supporting the National Quantum Initiative. I appreciate that this bill instructs the coordination of quantum research and development across agencies and with industry and academic partners. I believe this is key to ensuring the success of this effort. I would like to emphasize that this is a technically risky endeavor, and neither technological success nor great practical relevance is assured. But I'm proud that Congress is operating on the advice of top scientists, is willing to take that risk. There's a famous quote that's attributed to two great scientists, Michael Faraday and Benjamin Franklin, when asked about new technologies such as electricity and what the practical relevance is. And their response was, of what use is a newborn baby? And this, I think, really is a fair description of quantum technology at this point. However, given the bipartisan support for this initiative, I was disappointed to see that this bill explicitly does not fund the participating agencies to start several new activities. My amendment today corrects this problem by striking language in the bill that states that no additional funds are authorized to carry out the National Quantum Initiative. The decision to legislate new activities without new funding would inevitably mean that other valuable research in these agencies would suffer. I'm also concerned that the Director of National Quantum Coordination Office is appointed by the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, a position that President Trump has not filled almost 2 years into his term of office. Now, I understand that the chair is opposed to this amendment, so as a courtesy to him, I will withdraw it. But I do hope to work with my Republican colleagues to increase funding for the participating agencies so that the National Quantum Initiative can be properly funded without damage to other activities. And with that, I'd like to yield 1 minute to my colleague, Ms. Esty.
Thank you. And I too, and I know from our hearings that quantum has enormous potential for this country, and other countries are leaning in hard, allocating lots of resources, and I think it would be penny wise and pound foolish for us to try to support in name this initiative and not actually secure vital funding. We know China is investing massive resources in basic R&D, and again, for us to remain on the cutting edge, we need to actually back that up with some resources. So I join my colleague, Mr. Foster, and thank him for raising this amendment. And I think it's important, and I hope moving forward we can look to find a way to ensure that this critically important initiative receives the funding, not just the titles, but the funding it's going to need to, again, keep the U.S. on that cutting edge of research and allow us to be competitive in the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I withdraw the amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Foster, and thank you, Ms. Esty, as well. Let me say that I know you all are aware of the constraints we sometimes operate under, and under House rules, we can't increase the funding right now. But let me reassure both of you that I do support an increase in funding, and we'll look for ways to try to achieve that. And Mr. Foster, appreciate the courtesy, and without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. If there are no further amendments or reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 6227 to the House as amended with the recommendation that the bill be approved. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 6227 to the House as amended. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill is ordered reported favorably. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. H.R. 6227 is ordered reported to the House. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical conforming changes, and without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to now notice, we now go to H.R. 6229, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Reauthorization Act of 2018, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6229, a bill to authorize the programs of the National Institute of Standards and Technology and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and I understand we will now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Subcommittee Chairman Comstock's Bill H.R. 6229, the National Institutes of Standard and Technology Reauthorization Act of 2018. NIST works to promote innovation and industry competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology. This legislation authorizes NIST Industrial Technology Services account, construction accounts, and bolsters the Science and Technical Research and Services Lab account for the fiscal years of 2018 and 2019. NIST has the mission and capacities to contribute to areas critical to the United States' global competitiveness. To this end, for fiscal year 2019, the legislation authorizes increased investments in 4 merging technology areas: quantum science, artificial science, data science, advanced communications, and the Internet of Things, and composites research and standards development. As we've just heard during our consideration of the National Quantum Initiative Act of 2018, an international race to claim quantum supremacy has begun. And it is not just in quantum that we are racing our international rivals to develop. By facilitating NIST development of tools to address performance and reliability concerns of artificial intelligence, NIST will accelerate, the implementation of AI systems and give U.S. industries a competitive edge. The discoveries and technology advances that will stem from these investments will significantly affect the nation's economy in decades to come. One of the great challenges of the 21st century is cybersecurity, and this legislation helps NIST address growing cyber threat landscape by providing for the increase of its fundamental and applied cyber research to address key questions relating to the measurement of privacy, security, and the vulnerability of software tools and communication networks. This committee has held multiple hearings on cybersecurity since the news that the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, was the target of 2 massive data breaches, exposing the sensitive information of over 21 million Americans, and yes, many of our constituents. Last month, the Office of OMB published the Federal Cybersecurity Risk Detection Report and Action Plan in accordance with the Trump Executive Order number 13,800. The report identifies that 74% of federal agencies participating in the risk assessment process have cybersecurity programs that are either at risk or high risk. The report also confirms the need to take bold approaches to improve federal cybersecurity. NIST plays a very important role in protecting from cyber threats through its ongoing cybersecurity research, including the applications of blockchain technology and by providing guidelines and standards to help reduce cyber risk in federal agencies and critical infrastructure. This legislation requires NIST to enhance and expand its guidance and assist federal agencies to help them effectively use the NIST-authored framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. The President's executive order directed each agency to use the framework. It is my hope that this language will prompt agencies to rely on NIST expertise in order to adopt the best risk management practices within their agencies. This committee has a long bipartisan record of support for NIST and its contribution to research and development. It is my hope that all of my colleagues in the committee will continue that tradition and support this bill. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this important piece of legislation for consideration. Thank you, Ranking Member Johnson and Ranking Member Lipinski, and other members of the committee for your work with the chairwoman and supporting this bill. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. I also want to mention that the sponsor of the bill, Barbara Comstock, is at a funeral, and appreciate the gentleman from Oklahoma stepping in for her.
Chairman?
The gentleman from Illinois.
Would you strike the last word?
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate the majority moving this bill and happy to co-sponsor it with the assurances of the manager's amendment, which I believe will momentarily be passing. We really need to, this really helps to put NIST in a good position to carry out its work through the end of fiscal year 2019. And as we all know, NIST expertise across many fields is critical to our economy, our research enterprise, and our manufacturing sector. And I want to particularly highlight the strong support for the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership and the Manufacturing USA programs, which received a robust authorization under the Industrial Technology Services account. And I thank the majority for their willingness to increase the FY19 authorization level to match the agency request. I have a strong relationship with the Manufacturing USA Institute for Digital Manufacturing, located just outside my district in Chicago. Through partnerships with universities, manufacturers, nonprofits, and government entities, they work to develop the technology-enabled manufacturing tools industry needs, pilot them on the factory floor, and train the manufacturing workforce. Beyond manufacturing, I also want to highlight the critical position pay authority this bill gives NIST to hire talented cybersecurity and quantum information science professionals. It is often difficult for federal agencies to attract top-level talent in these fields because the federal pay scale cannot compete with the private sector. This bill grants a limited exemption to the federal pay scale to ensure that NIST will have access to the right people to lead the nation in cybersecurity and quantum information science. This is an issue that has been raised before this committee in hearings, and so I'm very happy that we do this in the bill. It will certainly be very helpful to hire the people that we need. So I want to urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. We will now proceed with amendments, and the first one up is the manager's amendment that will be offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, and he's recognized for that purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the
And the
desk.
clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6229, offered by Mr. Lucas of Oklahoma on behalf of Mrs. Comstock of Virginia, amendment number 01.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer today a manager's amendment on behalf of Chair Comstock that makes a few changes in the bill, responding to feedback from members of the committee. The amendment authorizes the current level for NIST's Industrial Technology Services account in the fiscal years of 2018 and 2019. It also clarifies NIST's role in assisting federal agencies and their staffs with using NIST framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. I want to thank the chairman, the ranking member, and ranking member Lipinski for working with the chairwoman on this manager's amendment, and I urge my colleagues to support the amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? The gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, is recognized.
Chairman, I move to strike the last
The
word.
gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word because I'm relieved that we were able to work in a bipartisan manner to restore level funding for the FY19 funding for the industrial technology services activities, which include important manufacturing programs such as NNMI and MEP. Manufacturing is critical to the American economy, to jobs, and our national security. Our manufacturing sector employs nearly 1 in 10 of our workers and makes up some 12% of our GDP. Reports have confirmed that, on average, each manufacturing job creates additional 3 to 4 jobs due to the required research, development, and process design and needed supply chain and post-sales services, as well as boosting the service sector as a result of high-paying manufacturing jobs with an average annual compensation of about $80,000. Personally, I strongly believe that the government should be a partner in working to revitalize and strengthen the U.S. manufacturing sector, and that NIST plays a vital role in this endeavor. As a representative for the Capital Region of New York, I realize that moving toward an innovation economy is the key to economic growth. With that in mind, I am pleased to witness our nation's renewed desire to invest in a high-tech manufacturing effort and in an innovation economy. I was proud when we came together as a nation and made a commitment to invest in manufacturing when we created the first ever National Network of Manufacturing Hubs, or National Network of Manufacturing Innovation, NNMI, through the overwhelming bipartisan package of the Revitalize American Manufacturing and Innovation, or RAMI Act. I see great hope for these efforts if we have continued support and sustained long-term funding as we see in other countries. NNMIs help accelerate innovation by investing in industrially relevant manufacturing technologies with broad applications, and by supporting manufacturing technology commercialization by bridging the gap between the laboratory and the market. I also support the work of MEPs. The MEP program is a nationwide network of proven resources that enables manufacturers to compete globally, supports greater supply chain integration, and provides access to information, training, and technologies that improve efficiency, productivity, and profitability. The MEP program's well-documented impact is substantial. In fiscal year 2016 alone, MEP projects with small and medium-sized manufacturers created or retained some 68,477 jobs, generated more than $8 billion in new and retained sales, and provided cost savings of more than $1.2 billion. I thank this committee for continued support of NNMIs and MEPs, which are both vital to revitalizing and supporting American manufacturing, while I support visionary investments that include increases and sustained long-term funding. I am relieved that at least this funding has been restored to FY19. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Tonko, for those comments. If there's no further discussion, the question is on the Lucas Amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Mr. Tonko, after that last great statement, do you still want to offer an amendment?
Well, I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chair, but because of the manager's amendment, I don't know if there's anyone that wants to speak to my amendment, but if not, I would withdraw.
Okay, appreciate that. And without objection, the amendment is withdrawn.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, seeks recognition.
As we move forward with this reauthorization, let us note that in the Constitution of the United States, in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, establishes what authorities we have in our, what we are dealing from, what legal authority we started and where we're at. And in Article 1, Section 8, it says that the federal government shall have the power to fix standards and weights and measures. And I think that what we're doing today, I think when we have such a massive debt that we're having to deal with, we need to go back and understand that when we are doing things that are fundamental and are important, and fixing the standards and weights and measures for our country is exactly what NIST is all about and exactly what science is all about. And this, I believe, I would just like to remind our colleagues that we're doing something that our founding fathers could envision us doing, but it's up to us to do so in a responsible manner. Thank you very much.
Good reminder, Mr. Rohrabacher. Thank you for that. If there are no further amendments or reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 6229 to the House is amended with the recommendation that the bill be approved. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 6229 to the House. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. H.R. 6229 is ordered reported to the House. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical conforming changes, and without objection, so ordered. Great. We now go to consideration of H.R. 6226. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 6226, the American Space Safe Management Act, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6226, a bill to direct the Secretary of Commerce to provide for civil space situational awareness services and information and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and I'll recognize myself to speak in favor of the legislation. The world is on the cusp of an amazing revolution in space. Today, there are 1,100 active satellites in orbit. In a few years, there will be tens of thousands, and a variety of new and dynamic spacecraft will go into operation, such as private space stations, on-orbit repair and refueling satellites, and celestial resource prospectors. With this great increase in activity, it is time for our nation to lead the world by establishing a space traffic management framework that will ensure a safe operating environment in outer space. The American Space Safe Management Act addresses this timely and important challenge facing spacefaring nations. It does so by addressing science and technology, space situational awareness, and space traffic management. First, this act directs the administration to coordinate its federal research and development investments in space traffic management. It also directs the administration to work collaboratively with the private sector. Finally, it establishes a NASA Center of Excellence that will develop, lead, and promote research in space traffic management. Second, this act creates a Space Situational Awareness, or SSA, program within the Department of Commerce. Commerce will provide a basic level of SSA information and services free of charge to the public. While the Department of Defense retains the tracking sources currently used to compile the catalog of space objects, Commerce will augment that with data from other sources, including the private sector and foreign partners. Many stakeholders want access not only to SSA services, but also to the underlying data. So this act establishes a space situational awareness testbed that complements the broader SSA program. This testbed will allow the public to access certain SSA data subject to relevant national security and foreign policy concerns. Third, a space traffic management framework will be established. This framework will be built on top-down voluntary guidelines developed by the government, bottom-up standards developed by industry, and a pilot space traffic coordination program. The pilot program will allow the government and stakeholders to experiment and learn more about the best ways to manage space traffic. This framework is a common-sense first step in what will be a long-term process of developing a comprehensive space traffic management framework. The American Space Safe Management Act is the culmination of years of work that this committee has undertaken. Over 4 years ago, this committee held its first of several hearings on space traffic management, followed by many hearings, roundtable events, and meetings with stakeholders. The Space Safe Management Act has the full support of the President, Vice President, the National Space Council, and Secretaries of Defense, Transportation, and Commerce. Original co-sponsors include Space Subcommittee Chairman Brian Babin, Representative Berra, Representative Lucas, Representative Perlmutter, and Representative Rohrabacher. Thanks go to the committee members and staff for developing this history-making, common-sense, bipartisan bill. At this time, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters of support for the American Space Safe Management Act from the following organizations: Commercial Space Flight Federation, a trade association with over 80 members, companies, and organizations, Bigelow Aerospace, Maxar, and SpaceX. That concludes my statement, and do you want to be recognized? No. And we will now proceed with amendments in the order listed in the roster, and the first amendment on the roster is a manager's amendment, and I'll recognize myself to offer the amendment, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6226, offered by Mr. Smith of Texas, amendment number 002.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and I recognize myself to explain the amendment. This amendment represents a good faith effort to incorporate constructive feedback received from Representative Berra and Representative Perlmutter and other stakeholders after the bill was noticed for markup. This amendment directs the Secretaries of Commerce and Defense, in coordination with relevant agencies, to submit a plan outlining the transition of Space Situational Awareness Information and Services Program to the Department of Commerce and how a gap in providing SSA information and services will be prevented. This amendment clarifies that the Secretary of Commerce may leverage existing workforce and experience of other federal agencies. The amendment also makes it clear that the policy of the United States is to timely develop voluntary civil space traffic coordination guidelines, practices, and standards to ensure a safe operating environment and inform the development of a comprehensive space traffic management framework. Finally, the Secretary of Commerce is directed to report biennially on recommendations to facilitate the development of a comprehensive space traffic management framework. I firmly believe this amendment improves and strengthens the policy of the American Space Safe Management Act, and I thank Representatives Berra and Perlmutter for their constructive engagement and negotiation of these policy provisions. It is a better bill as a result. Is there further discussion? The gentleman from California, Mr. Berra, the ranking member, is recognized for his
Thank you,
comments.
Mr. Chairman. As you've already noted, we've had multiple hearings on the complexity of space and the importance of space traffic management. And so I'm glad that this process continues to move forward. As we discussed at the hearing last week in the subcommittee, it still remains to be seen what the best transition looks like, but we all agree that there does need to be a transition, and I'm glad that the chairman was able to direct DOD and Commerce through the manager's amendment and improving the bill to come back to Congress for a report on what this would look like. I think General Hyten said it best, and when he described, if you're walking on a wing and a wing walker, you don't let go of one strut until you're firmly holding the next strut. And let's make sure we have a firm grip on that next strut before we let go of the current DoD strategy. So again, I thank the chairman for accepting some of the suggestions that Mr. Perlmutter and I made, and I think it does make the bill a better bill, and I'll be supporting the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Barra. And the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, is recognized. I might warn the gentleman there's nothing about Mars in this amendment. And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the chairman's willingness to work with me and Congressman Barra in connection. Turn that on. In connection with this bill, I think this is an important bill. Obviously, from the testimony we heard last week from General Hyten, Administrator Bridenstine, and Secretary Ross, and we know on this committee that as we continue to launch, as we continue to add satellites and CubeSats, as the debris continues to mount, we have to have management of the traffic up there. And within this bill, we talk about space situational awareness. That's really knowing what is up there and where it is. And that would be primarily the Defense Department's responsibility to pinpoint. And then, under the bill, to have Commerce, working with NASA, DOD, and other agencies, develop this management plan in case of collisions and figuring out who's in what lane and the like. And so one of the things that we've done, and I appreciate the majority's willing to work with us in this manager's amendment, is to make sure that Commerce has sufficient personnel, either through NASA's cooperation or Department of Defense's cooperation, to be able to do this right. And so we'll figure out as we develop this space situational awareness and space traffic management, who's doing what, but we have to get busy, and I appreciate the chairman's taking this bill and moving forward. I do want us to continue to visit about this because I think there are some other sections we do need to talk about so that they aren't counterproductive, and that would be the section on immunity, which is found on page 9, lines 3 through 11. We ought to talk about that some more as the bill proceeds, and then also as to the voluntary guidelines. Because at some point, there needs to be the ability to enforce who's in what lane, who was negligent, who did what, and it's not just going to be a voluntary kind of a setting, I don't think, because I liken it to actual traffic management here on Earth, to make sure people know how things are being managed and who's in what lane. But I think this is really a good approach. I'm prepared to support it, and I thank the chairman for working with us in trying to figure out how best to implement this management program. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter, for your contributions to the bill through the amendment. And you mentioned liability, which we all know is a delicate balance, but we can continue to try to address that as well. There's no further discussion on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. We'll now go to what I believe will be the last amendment of the day, and this will be an amendment offered by the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Johnson. She's recognized for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment.
And the
at
clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6226, offered by Ms. Johnson of Texas, amendment number 001.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very straightforward. It would direct NASA administrator to enter into an arrangement with the national academies to carry out an assessment of what capabilities are needed for the provision of civil federal government space situational awareness data, information, and services, as well as what capabilities currently exist at federal agencies to meet these needs. The assessment would provide a recommendation to Congress as to which agency should be the lead in delivering these space situational awareness functions. The national academies would deliver this assessment to Congress within 1 year. The intent of my amendment is also very straightforward. It is intended to give Congress the information it will need to determine which government agency should be the lead for the provision of civil space situational awareness, or SSA. Because we should not simply rubber stamp the Trump administration's proposal to have the Department of Commerce be the lead agency, any more than we should simply adopt the interagency consensus reached in the Obama administration that FAA should be the lead. As was strongly argued by at least one member of last Friday's hearing on SSA, the one we've had held on the topic in more than 4 years, the administration can propose its approach to civil SSA, but Congress then needs to do its job and engage in serious oversight, hold hearings, and hear from a broad array of stakeholders. Only after it has done its own work on the issue and examined the administration's proposals in depth can Congress make informed decisions about the best way to proceed. This committee has somehow found the time to hold at least 5 hearings under our chairman on the search of alien life, an interesting topic to be sure, but with one little legislative relevance. At the same time, we can't be bothered to seriously investigate the legislative and policy proposals put forth by the current administration. We're once again rushing to a markup today without having first done our homework and our job as legislators. And so we will once again mark up a bill that has received very little serious scrutiny. My amendment would allow the rush to be blindly fall in line, would slow the rush to the blindly fall in line behind this administration's plan, and instead let us make sure the independent and objective analysis of the national academies. Some may say that we can't afford to wait a year to get the information we need, but I ask, why not? The DOD is going to continue to provide their SSA services. It is not going to unilaterally walk away from that responsibility. We are not risking anything by taking time to do our job as members of Congress. I had planned to offer an amendment that would have assigned the lead SSA responsibility to our nation's premier space agency, NASA, to make the point that there are serious alternatives to commerce that need to be considered by Congress. In many ways, it makes more sense to assign the role to NASA. NASA already works closely with DOD on SSA and on collision avoidance. It has a wealth of knowledge and experience and resources that it can bring to bear. NASA has demonstrated the ability to garner international support on past issues, and I believe it can do the same for SSA and space traffic management because it is trusted as an unbiased, neutral agency. Some will say that while NASA is the most qualified civil agency to do the job, they are not a regulatory agency. I agree. NASA is not a regulatory agency, but as I read the bill, there are no regulatory responsibilities defined or mandated in the lead civil agency for SSA. But at the end of the day, I'm not prepared to say that NASA is the answer, even if it appears to be an obviously better choice than Commerce. We simply do not yet have enough information to make an informed decision. This is why we need the national academies to help us understand these complex issues. We might not agree with the academy's recommendation, but if in the meantime we're also doing our job as a committee and holding hearings and getting input from experts and stakeholders, we will be far better prepared to legislate in this area after we get the academy's assessment. And there could be serious consequences if we get this wrong. In the past, when Congress has legislated haphazardly and assigned brand new functions to agencies ill-equipped to deal with them, bad things have happened. Assigning SSA function to an unprepared agency could end up costing the federal government a lot of wasted money and time, and we stand up to what is essentially a new agency when other better alternatives may already exist. In summary, my amendment is really a Science Committee Do Your Job amendment, and I urge my colleagues to support it, and I thank you and yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, and I'll recognize myself in opposition to the amendment. This amendment would direct the National Academy of Science to conduct an assessment and recommend a space traffic management framework. I don't think we need to wait for another study on this topic. Congress has asked and received similar studies. Pursuant to the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015, NASA delivered to Congress over 18 months ago a report on, quote, frameworks for the management of space traffic and orbital activities, end quote. In addition, the Institute for Defense Analyses did a report, which is publicly available, for the Obama administration in 2016, evaluating options for civil space situational awareness. It is time for us to act. As General Hyten and Administrator Bridenstine testified last week, time is critical. The number of commercial satellites in space are predicted to grow from 1,300 active satellites today to more than 10,000 in just the next few years. If we don't develop a space traffic management framework immediately, we risk the safety of the space operational environment. So I have to oppose the amendment. Is there any further discussion? If not, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Ms. Johnson. All in favor say aye.
I ask for record vote.
A recorded vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll. And let me say we may be leaving the vote open for a couple of minutes, too, depending on the result. Oh, no, I think we've got good. I take it back. I think we've got good representation over here. Okay.
They can think.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mr. Smith votes no. Mr. Lucas? No. Mr. Lucas votes no. Mr. Rohrabacher? No. Mr. Rohrabacher votes no. Mr. Brooks? No. Mr. Brooks votes no. Mr. Holtgren? No. Mr. Holtgren votes no. Mr. Posey? No. Mr. Posey votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Weber? Mr. Knight? No. Mr. Knight votes no. Mr. Babin? Mrs. Comstock? Mr. Loudermilk? No. Mr. Loudermilk votes no. Mr. Abraham? Mr. Palmer? Mr. Palmer votes no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. Marshall? No. Mr. Marshall votes no. Mr. Dunn? No. Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Higgins? Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman votes no. Mrs. Lesko?
No.
Mrs. Lesko votes no. Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson votes yes. Ms. Lofgren? Mr. Lipinski? Mr. Lipinski votes yes. Ms. Bonamici? Ms. Bonamici votes yes. Mr. Vera? Mr. Vera votes no. Ms. Esty? Ms. Esty votes yes. Mr. Vesey? Mr. Vesey votes yes. Mr. Breyer? Ms. Rosen? Ms. Rosen votes yes. Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb votes yes. Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney votes yes. Mr. Perlmutter? Mr. Perlmutter votes no. Mr. Tonko? Mr. Tonko votes yes. Mr. Foster? Mr. Foster votes yes. Mr. Takano? Mr. Takano votes yes. Ms. Hanabusa? Ms. Hanabusa votes yes. Mr. Christ? Mr. Christ votes yes.
You got back. Thank you. Do we have someone who's on the way? The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, 13 members have voted yes, 17 members have voted no.
Okay, and the amendment is not agreed to. If there are no further amendments reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 6226 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 6226 to the House as amended. All those in favor?
Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Who seeks to be recognized? The gentleman from California in the middle of a vote wants to be recognized.
I tried to get your attention before you called the vote.
Okay, the gentleman is recognized.
I'll make this very quick. I'd just like to express my strong support for this bill, H.R. 6226. Just to note that I've been working on legislation like this for about 20 years, and so I'm very gratified by your leadership and the unanimity that we have among our colleagues to actually provide a useful non-regulatory approach to dealing with very serious challenges of space debris, space situational awareness, and space traffic coordination. This act lays the foundation for developing the technologies that will enable private industry and as well as government, and to provide the development of the standards and the framework that will lead us to the best solutions of these very serious challenges that, as I say, for 15 years, I've been talking about debris, and I'm gratified that we have taken it seriously and that this administration is taking it seriously. This is a major step in the right direction that will enable us to deal with roadblocks that if we do not deal with these roadblocks, we will be prevented from utilizing to its best degree the benefits of space for our country and for all mankind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher, for those constructive comments. And the gentlewoman from Texas, the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, is also recognized for her comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That statement supports why I want us to do our work well. And I want to thank Mr. Rohrabacher for making my point. I will not object to the passing of this legislation, but I want the record to reflect that we have a responsibility to do the work that we were sent here to do for the good of the people of the nation.
Okay. Thank you, too, Ms. Johnson. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 6226 to the House as amended. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the motion to consider is laid upon the table. H.R. 6226 is ordered reported to the House. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes. Without objection, so ordered. Before we adjourn, I just want to, this is probably the best turnout we've had of members of this committee, and I just appreciate everybody's participation and presence. And I also want to especially thank the staff. We had staff on both sides of 4 subcommittees involved with these 3 bills. And for some reason, Chris Weiler always seems to be in the middle of everything. But anyway, we appreciate the work of all the staff on both sides. And also, I think this, let me make a rough prediction here, that when we finish our suspension votes on the floor this afternoon, I think the committee will have successfully taken 33 bills to the floor, 30 of which were bipartisan. So it's a credit to members of this committee on both sides. If there's no further discussion, that completes our business. This concludes the Science Committee markup. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.